We have entrepreneur, Democratic presidential candidate, and prolific tweeter himself, Andrew Yang. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, it's great to be here. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're safe and sound.
Same to you. And it's a treat to have you here. As I was saying, you're a prolific tweeter. Last night, you're on Twitter. And while I want to talk about data privacy, you have a topic that you've talked a ton about, and you were tweeting about it last night that I wanted to get a little more lens into your thinking on. You tweeted about this idea of a $2,000 payment per month to each American during the coronavirus. Are you talking about over an extended period of time? And would this be, in your mind, should it be for every American? Walk me through that.
Well, right now, stimulus checks are arriving in people's accounts, but millions of Americans, even tens of millions of Americans, have been out of work for a month, and their bills are mounting. So they get $1,200. That enables them to pay last month's bills. And let's say they're home for another month. What are they going to do? Congress needs to make these checks ongoing for the duration of the crisis. And I'm arguing for $2,000 a month while we're all stuck at home, which is going to be enough to take a load off of millions of Americans. We're in unprecedented levels of joblessness among Americans. I think I saw yesterday that the ratio of working Americans to population is lower than it's ever been right now. It's inching towards 50%. So we need to make very dramatic moves to allow millions of Americans to have, frankly, the knowledge that they can feed their families in the days to come.
But that, assuming that the virus and sort of the lockdown that comes from it, especially in different parts of the country, could go on for many, many months, you're talking about trillions of dollars in additional money that would go out from the federal government into people's paychecks instantaneously, correct?
Yes, I am. And when the house is on fire, you don't worry that much about the water you're using to put it out. We have the equivalent of a $21 trillion fire on our hands, and we have to do everything we can to help people get through this. I mean, in the absence of this kind of stimulus, you would see unthinkable things happening. I mean, unthinkable things are happening right now in the United States of America. You know, you have mass graves, and people doing really heartbreaking things to try and keep themselves safe. But things can get even worse if you have people literally facing mass deprivation and they're not sure how they're even going to put food on the table. So this, to me, is a necessary investment in the preservation of our economy and society. And again, if you have a $21 trillion fire, you don't worry that much about the money you're spending to put the fire out.
Have you talked to Joe Biden or his staff about this concept? Do you think this is something that the Democratic Party as a whole could rally around? Because you don't have that much time. They'd have to rally quickly and really build up a lot of public support for this.
And there are dozens of legislators that are going to be pushing forward this plan. And I'm in touch with members of Congress. I was just texting with Joe's team yesterday. Joe's not himself a big texter, so I'm not like texting Joe all the time. But yeah, I'm in touch with a bunch of people who are going to be pushing forward a plan that's essentially identical to what I'm championing right here.
Do you think Joe Biden himself will champion this idea?
I think Joe's a very, very smart, practical leader, and he knows we need to do everything we can to provide for people in a time of crisis.
During the campaign, you spent a lot of time talking about this idea of a universal basic income, largely at that time, your fear about the effect that automation it can have on the entire workforce. That basically you're going to have industries that could be obliterated almost overnight because of the speed of technology and its ability to really upend almost any job, any industry. And now we're looking at it from a pandemic lens. Like, walk me through like how you now think about the fears you have for the workforce today with the pandemic being stacked on top of the automation fears that you had.
The 5 most common job categories in the United States are administrative and clerical work, sales and retail, food service and food preparation, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. And those jobs are getting obliterated in many parts of our economy. A third of America's stores and malls were closing prior to the crisis. Now you've closed probably 80% of them. Macy's just furloughed the vast majority of their 130,000 employees. How many of those employees do you think they're going to rehire? Do we really think that every Macy's is going to suddenly reopen and be back to at 100% capacity? A lot of these jobs are gone for good. This is not like a rubber band that's going to snap back into place. And you know this. Anyone who talks to CEOs knows this. The CEOs are already looking at ways to do more with fewer people, that they're automating processes. They're going to shrink office places. A lot of the people that are working from home are going to continue working from home, but there are a lot of people who've lost their jobs that are never going to see their jobs return. So this is unfortunately accelerating the trends I was most concerned about into the space of days and weeks instead of months and years. I've been saying that we're going to see 10 years worth of change in 10 weeks. And that's going to mean many, many millions of Americans are kicked to the curb in terms of their ability to support themselves in the jobs that they once had.
Another topic that you've talked about, tweeted about, is data privacy. I feel like most people watching this are kind of like me or my family. You just kind of click your way through life. You're not thinking a ton about the data that other people have access to and sort of the danger of having sort of the capabilities for other governments, for companies, for people to know so much about us. Tell me, like, why should I care? Like, why is that such a big topic? Why is it something that people don't pay that much attention to, but they should?
Our data is getting sold and resold and packaged and repackaged without us really knowing what is going on. And one thing that you should care about is that you're talking about billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of value that's changing hands, and you're not seeing a dime. None of us are. So one of the things that I champion on the campaign trail is that our data should be ours, even if we loan it to tech companies for our own convenience. And we should be able to see what they're doing, be able to turn it off if we want. And if there's value that is changing hands, we should be participating in that. So that is, to me, like a data bill of rights that we as citizens should have, because we're completely outgunned by these trillion-dollar tech companies that are right now making us think that we're making our own decisions while they're leaving digital breadcrumbs and profiting at every step.
And what's the advice that you would give your, there's a question we actually had from one of our viewers, like what's advice that you would give your family in terms of things you should avoid if you don't want people to know way, way too much about you? Things that we might not think of. Are there specific products, specific companies that we should be more fearful of?
No, I don't want to call out specific companies. I would say that as a whole, we as citizens and consumers are completely and hopelessly outmatched and outgunned, where no one actually reads those statements. We just click, I agree, and then we hope for the best. What I'm saying is that as a people, we need a counterweight to the technology giants that right now are profiting from our data and leaving us out in the cold. And so my organization, Humanity Forward, is actually working on an initiative in that direction. What I would say to folks, instead of saying somehow, frankly, that individual consumers can just avoid this entire data selling and reselling phenomenon if you just avoid a handful of bad actors, frankly, that's just not the case, because this is the industry standard. And the only way you could avoid it entirely is if you were to unplug entirely, which is not realistic for virtually any of us, especially now that we're all stuck at home. I mean, if you imagine trying to unplug now, then you'd be missing this conversation and you wouldn't be able to talk to, like any of your relatives that are outside of your house.
Quick final question before you go, political question. There's been some talk that you might one day want to be mayor of New York. Do you want to be mayor of New York?
I want to help solve the problems that are coming down the pike. And unfortunately, those problems are getting bigger. Well, that's a high impact role. I got, my organization, Humanity Forward, has already distributed 1.3 million in economic relief, the majority of which went to families in the Bronx. So I'm just trying to solve problems. And unfortunately, this crisis has accelerated many of those problems that I saw coming in the months ahead, but now they're here right now.
I will take that as a yes, even though it was an indirect one. Thank you very much, Andrew Yang.
Put the money in our hands. 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 hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.